Hey everybody, it's Dr. Oubre and Aubree. Or as we've been recently coined,
Oubree. I almost said that. Thanks, Nicole.
This month we're talking about toxins and how they affect you and all that. And so specifically in this video, we want to talk about how to test for toxins, because what's fascinating about where we're at in functional medicine now is that you can literally test for all the things that functional medicine providers have been saying for years, as far as candida and mercury and toxic overload and all these things. Now we're at the point where if you think you have something, you can literally be tested for that something and prove whether it's there or not. Now every test has its limitations, so it's not always perfect, but we want to talk about the most common toxins and how you can actually test for them to see if you have a problem. But there are specific ways to test for them in order to find it, and we want to help you and your provider dodge some of those pitfalls.
And we luckily have decided to take this on ourselves for the past couple of years and fail at testing properly.
Yes.
And try new methods, right? And the most efficient way.
So we know how not to do it.
Exactly. But actually we know how to do it. We do.
Or at least we fake it on TV.
There you go.
So, just to recap, we kind of said it in the last video as far as how to avoid toxins and what those toxins are. We like to boil toxins down to 4 individual categories. They're fairly broad categories, but that's the basic. So the first one is biological toxins. We cannot emphasize this one enough because this is the one that we actually can't test for directly. You cannot see biological toxins. There is no test for it. What you can test for is the presence of bad bacteria and fungus and candida and mold and all those things. So biological toxins, we like to consider any pathogen that's in the gut, making LPS or biological toxins. There you can actually test for LPS. But also mycoplasma in the lungs. Think about mold and biological things that can survive in the sinuses, marcons, all of those things. Yes. So biological toxins, those are hard to test for, but you can, we'll get there. That's the first category. Number 2 is mold.
Yes.
So mold toxins specifically. So mold is a living, growing organism, just like a chemical plant. Well, it's not living, growing, but a chemical plant makes chemicals. You don't have chemical plant inside you. You have chemicals inside of you. So you can grow mold inside of you, and you can harbor mold toxins for decades. We've proven that, decades, that you can hold these mold toxins, even if you're not still living in the moldy environment, or if mold is growing inside you. So mold toxins is technically a biological toxin, but it's so problematic and difficult that we put it in its own category. Number 2.
Because those toxins too, I guess we'll dive into it later.
Okay. Number 3 category is environmental chemicals. We talked about the chemical plant. We talked about in the last video, beauty products and non-organic foods and Roundup and clean air, clean food, all that jazz, right? So environmental chemicals is kind of anything and everything. And then number 4 is heavy metals, which is different than chemicals, although heavy metals are often in the same things you would get exposed to with environmental chemicals. But metals are a particular problem because just like mold, they have a particular way to be detoxified. So one way to think about it is heavy metals have to be chelated. Now, there's a specific removal process for heavy metals. I do not believe that heavy metals should be lumped into detox. They're a special way to be removed. You can't just eat cilantro and get rid of metals no matter what you've been told. All other chemicals, biological toxins, mold toxins, they all come out through our generic human detoxification pathways. So as long as you're working on those and you're not retoxing, as we talked about in the first video, then you will be detoxifying biological, mold, and chemicals, but you cannot detoxify metals. Those must be chelated and removed. So that's the basic categories of, you're dying to say something.
No, I'm not. I'm like, you're good, you're good. No, I'm really not.
So those are the 4 categories of toxins. So now we're going to talk about testing for those toxins.
You go.
Well, I thought you wanted to say something.
No, there's a lot. This is good.
Okay, we'll start off with how do we test for biological toxins?
Biological toxins.
Ready,
the
go.
First 2 tests that we do commonly in the practice. First one is obviously a stool study. You'll see about...
Obviously.
Sorry.
Just looking at our front door, you know we collect poop.
Obviously. It's disgusting.
We don't actually collect it.
No.
You will collect. We just give you the box.
We do.
You do it at home.
I know.
Unless you're an employee, then some people collect it here, and that's disgusting.
It was very easy, okay?
I wasn't going to say any names, but...
Okay. First one we do is a stool study. We're not the biggest fan of things like a GI map or I can't even think of the other ones because I just don't care about them.
CSA and Yeah.
Yeah.
We don't need to disparage. Our favorite one is the GI effects from Genova.
GI effects from Genova. It's wonderful. It tests for yeast overgrowth, bacterial overgrowth, digestive components, markers of IBD like calprotectin, secretory IgA for inflammation, eosinophil protein X for food allergies and parasites potentially. Gives a full kind of view of your microbiome, which is my favorite part of it as well. And it gives you enough. It gives you enough to look at. It's very comprehensive.
Unfortunately, it's not direct testing for biological toxins. That's still one area of functional medicine that we're lacking in. You can test for LPS. I think it's the only one I can really think of. And C. diff toxin. That's an obvious one.
Yeah, you can test for LPS and then your type of intestinal permeability, so we can kind of tell you what type of biological toxin is perpetuating intestinal permeability. No, not what type, sorry, how they're perpetuating intestinal permeability. But we know that these biological kind of pathogens, they produce toxins. We just can't necessarily measure that, but the mere presence of them in your gut is a measure of disease and toxin load.
And they can measure them in research setting. It's just not commercially available to something we can do in the practice per se.
Right.
Another interesting thing is that although we're not measuring biological toxins directly, we just pretty much assume that if you have a candida overgrowth or if you have poor digestion or if you have bowel inflammation, we're just going to assume that there's biological toxins there. Because as more and more research comes out, they're even showing that beneficial probiotics in the presence of a bad bacteria actually can make bacterial toxins and biological toxins. And so real briefly, we've mentioned this LPS, and you don't need to know all the details of LPS, but LPS is basically on the inside of bacteria, bad ones per se. They're inflammatory to the human body. LPS is inflammatory to the human body. So if you have a lot of LPS in your bloodstream, it's literally triggering your inflammatory pathways. If you inject someone with LPS, you basically put them into sepsis, and it's very miserable. We don't do that, but if you did do that. So that's just one of the ways to measure biological toxins, that you can think you're buying organic foods and doing the right thing, but if you're not treating the LPS in your bowels, you might as well, don't buy non-organic. Anyway, that didn't go according to plan. So one of the tests we can look for the idea that there's biological toxins is the stool study. What's the other test we do?
Organic acids test, and that's metabolites of these organisms themselves. So I like the organic acids test because we kind of like to do them side by side. If you're willing to do a stool study and organic acids test,
he does need help.
Then you can see the presence of the living organism from the live growing inside the stool, but as well as the metabolites they produce in the organic acids test. And the really cool thing about that too is like candida is very, very hard to grow in the stool, outside the body.
If it grows in the stool, you really have a candida problem.
And the one thing a stool study doesn't check is mold overgrowth.
Yeah, there's no mold growth.
The organic acids test at least can go, at least here's the presence, whether if it's in your, your gut or your sinuses or your respiratory tract, these organisms like yeast and fungus and mold and some bacteria are producing these metabolites. So, and those metabolites are only present if those organisms are present. So it's the metabolite necessarily isn't the toxin, but they kind of go hand in hand.
And any doctor can order these tests. These are not anything special. They just have to contact the lab, open an account, and then they can order it. Some of them are covered by insurance, semi-covered by insurance. The GI effects is semi-insurance based, and then we use Great Plains Labs for the organic acids test. There's a Genova version of the organic acids test called the NutriVal. It's not as good as the GPL version. But yeah, the GPL version is cash-based.
Yeah, and I like the organic acid test too because it will give you markers of like glutathione depletion, your toxic burden, how your ketone and fatty acid oxidation is being affected, how your neurotransmitters are being affected.
Mitochondrial function.
Yeah, mitochondrial function.
A smattering of stuff.
Yeah, but those are all affected by toxins. So if you see all of them out of markers or out of range, you have toxins affecting your body.
Notice you use the word toxins generically because when your mitochondria are broken and your detox pathways are bogged down, it does not tell us what's in your toxin bucket. All it says is the toxin bucket is full and it's affecting your biochemistry. So that's when we go down the functional medicine of testing and treating one by one, always starting with the gut and then going to the other four. So those are the two tests we mainly do for biological toxins, and then we move on to mold. So I'm going to say this again. I said it earlier, but there are two problems with mold. Well, there's lots of problems with mold, but there's two things with mold. So mold is a living, growing organism, and while it's living and growing, it's also making mold toxins. So mold wax on. The mold living, growing organism needs to be killed. The mold toxins is not living, growing, it needs to be detoxified. So whenever someone, I know you've got a lot to
Sorry.
say, hold on.
No, yeah,
so
I'm sorry.
whenever you're treating someone for mold, or if you're worried you have mold, the first step is to get out of the mold, because you can't kill it if you're living in it or breathing it constantly or working in it. Then number 2 is you have to kill it in your living body, not killing you, kill it in your living body. Then the third step is you can detoxify it. You can't do that backwards.
Yeah.
You can only get out, then kill it, then detoxify it. You cannot detoxify it while you're living in it. It's just, you can try. What did you want to say?
Oh, well,
Your turn.
To piggyback off of that, if you, the kind of insidious thing about mold is that if you kill the live living organism, you are not done.
You ain't done.
At all, because you not only had those kind of toxins that the live living were producing, but then you have to think of the exposure. Now they're fat and water soluble, so they can be in your brain, anywhere, liver, your fat cells. You still have to get rid of those toxins. So if you lived in a moldy house 5 years ago, but you did all the gut work to clear it, and you're like, great, my gut's clean, I have a great organic acids test, my stool study's good to go, but you didn't get the mold toxins or mycotoxins out of your cells or fat cells or brain, wherever, they're still inside you. And so I like that, how you said that you have to get out of the source first, you have to kill it first, and remember, don't forget about the sinuses or the respiratory tracts, because mold likes to kind of make a home there because you've breathed it in. And then you can go through and finally go through and get the toxins out. Do not make the mistake. I can't tell you how many people come in here and they're like, oh, I can't wait. I'm going to do,
you are.
Yeah, I'm going to do the detox infusions, but I haven't killed off the mold in my gut yet. I'm like, you can't push those toxins out yet. You're going to overtox and you're retoxify, and you're going to make your body worse. And mold loves to start a biological warfare. The second you try to kill it, it produces more and more and more. So you have to kind of reduce that burden. So I guess on that note too, instead of trying to push the toxins out of store, you do have to sometimes reduce the toxic burden that's circulating in your bloodstream before you kill off as well, depending how moldy you are. Because I guess you had the good metaphor about the hoarder in the house. I was kind of thinking about like in a middle school with a fire alarm. So you have all the kids in the classroom, and they're all, you have all these kids in the classroom, but then you have a lot of kids in the hallway. Then you pull the fire alarm and you go into the classroom and you go, guys, get out. Now you have all these kids storming the hallway with all these other kids in there. It's pure chaos. That's what happens when you're trying to push mold toxins out before you actually treat it or before you kill it.
I like that metaphor.
Yeah, that's what happens when you try to kill mold without removing the circulating burden. But what you should do is go, hey, kids in the hallway, let's get out first. Those are your circulating toxins in your bloodstream. Then you can go and pull the kids from the classroom into the hallway. That's in your gut that you have to kill.
I feel like if you added a herd of cats into that metaphor,
really
it would be even better. Pull the fire alarm, watch the cats.
One crazy teacher's like, I got this. Just lifts up a door. Just cats everywhere.
Right, a metaphor went as expected.
But that's one thing with mold, at least, that because they will produce toxins as being killed off. So
correct.
Sometimes you just got to do some binding work and glutathione and things like that. But
so
anyways.
We got a little off track with mold there, but then the question goes, how do we test for the mold and mycotoxins?
Right. So one of the biggest things is that people make a mistake is they do an unprovoked test. Remember, our body is very, very smart and likes to store these toxins whether if it's your hips or your eyeballs or your brain, you never know. So what happens is that the body wants to keep you safe. So it's not going to be necessarily urinating out the toxins for you to measure. You have to push them out of stores. So if we were to do, it's called the mycotox test by Great Plains Lab, we've seen a night and day difference. If you do an unprovoked test and bring it to us, we literally consider it null and void. Because your body, sometimes your detox pathways aren't open, your gut isn't fixed yet, and your body just isn't ready to dump it out there because there's too many other circulating toxins as well.
Let me pause you.
Yeah.
So whenever we're testing these detox or for these toxins, it's important to remember that we're not testing what's inside of you, we're testing what's coming out. We cannot see what's inside without like taking a fat sample and sending it to the lab, and no one can do that anyway. But that would be the only way to see what's actually inside of you. So the only way we can infer what's inside of you is to see what's coming out. So we add these provoking agents to intentionally push extra stuff out to give us an idea of what's inside and what might be hiding inside.
And what the interesting part about it that we really love too is once we find the original bulk of, let's say, mycotoxins in your body, and
so mycotoxins is a fancy word for mold toxins.
Yes.
Mold toxin.
So if we see that you are urinating out mycotoxins and we start you on treatment, what we commonly see is when we retest again, you're going to see more coming out. And this is good. It kind of proves our point of that those toxins are in stores and your body's finally pushing them out for us to measure. So you will see that big kind of bell curve.
Yes.
Like that.
So what's coming out is both a sign of what's actually inside of you, but also a sign of how quickly it's coming out of you. So if your mold toxin levels go up, it either means you have an ongoing worsening exposure, or it means that we're getting it out of you faster and faster and faster. So what Aubree is suggesting is in the beginning, your mold toxins are here, which are not good, then they get worse, and then they get better, and as they're getting better, then we know we're getting closer to the finish line.
Right.
And it can take months to years. It can literally take months to years.
It can.
Depending on how bad your exposure was.
And I've seen side-by-side tests of someone who had an organic acids test with some of the worst mold overgrowth I've seen. You know who you are. And then the mycotox was completely negative. And that's literally impossible if you have mold growing in your system. But that just proved this body isn't ready yet. It was not ready to purge the toxins. And the body was smart. And it knew, hey, you can't handle this load right now.
So Aubree just hitting at something that we missed. So there's, to go backwards, there's mold, living, growing organism. There's mold toxin, that's the chemical. So you need to test for both, because if you have either, then you have both.
Yes.
And so the living, growing organism, we use the organic acid test from Great Plains Labs. So really kind of the only one that has living, growing mold markers on it. And so those markers are what? 2, 4, 5, 6, and 9, I believe. If you have your report, they're numbered 2, 4, 5, 6, and 9. Now they're listed in orange letters as Aspergillus and Fusarium. Those are the mold markers. But we do not have enough mold markers. There are many more molds in this world than 2 molds, Aspergillus and Fusarium. But those are the only 2 living, growing mold markers we have. But suffice to say that if you're urinating out a bunch of mold toxins, then we assume something was living in you at one time. And so we always treat to kill before we treat to detoxify in these patients. We always treat them for mold.
Yeah.
Okay, so just a reminder, there's 2 tests for the biological. That's the stool study and the organic acids test. There's 2 tests for the mold. There's the organic acids test and the mycotox test. Both of those are frozen urine samples. For any toxin test, not the stool, not the organic acid, for any toxin test, you have to do a provoking. And so our provoking is we do 500 milligrams of glutathione twice a day. So a total of 1,000 milligrams of glutathione. We have a very specific glutathione product that we like. We don't trust many of the other ones.
We don't.
We have issues. We're biased, and we're open and honest about why we're biased, because we've seen it work, and we just don't want to try any others because we know it works. So you take 2 of those pills in the morning, 2 in the evening. There are other ways to do provocations, and there's even some controversy out there as far as whether we should be doing provoking or not, and I don't care what they say because we have seen it clinically. This is what we do. It works. We provoke everyone. If it's unprovoked and your levels are normal, that doesn't mean anything to us.
You just wasted money on a test.
Yes, and we do that, we do the glutathione 1,000 milligrams a day for 7 full days before you urinate in the cup. I've also heard that you can do sauna-based provocations where you do the sauna for 30 minutes and then you pee in the cup, but we've never experimented with that because we've had such good success with glutathione. We used to do the IV provocation, but we found that the pills were actually the more predictable way to get the toxin results than doing the infusion, which made a surge, and if you miss the surge, the test looks funny. Anyway, moving on. So mold toxin testing. Number 3 is, we said this video is going to be shorter.
But it's okay. It's good.
So number 3 is environmental chemicals. This one's more straightforward.
Yeah, so it's actually very similar to how you do the mycotox test.
It's literally the same.
The same exact thing.
You just pay a different money and check a different box.
GPL Tox by Great Plains Labs.
Yes.
Same exact thing. 7 days of glutathione provocation, pee in a cup the 8th morning, and there you go. That's your test.
The big downside of the GPL tox and really all of this environmental chemical testing is that we don't have markers for most of the toxins in our environment. I think on this GPL tox, if I quote, there's like 18 toxins that they test for on this. There are way more than 18 toxins in our bodies and lives. So
they're the common ones, right? Like MTBE and styrene and acrylamide and all those little fancy ones. But if you look, let's say if you were to take your shampoo and go on EWG or somewhere that measured all those ingredients, there's probably 80 ingredients in there, and most of them are toxic. And not a single one of them are listed on there. But if you actually Google those ingredients and toxins separately, you can see what causes reproductive issues, what causes cancer things like that.
Aubree mentioned EWG.org has an app called Think Dirty that you can look up. They don't have every product in there, but they've got a lot of the common products. It gives you a grade on how safe your products are. But I'll save you the trouble and just say if you got it at a local grocery store, it's probably toxic.
Good luck.
Even if you got it at Whole Foods, it's probably still toxic. So,
it is. I've debunked it.
Yeah, so go to our course, learn more about detoxification and which brands and stuff. We don't have time to talk about that now. And then last but not least is heavy metals, one of my favorite ones to talk about.
Can I say one thing real quick?
No.
Okay.
Yes.
If you're doing a hair heavy metal test, it is totally trash. I'm just going to be honest with you. It's totally trash. Please don't waste your money on it.
In defense of providers that are still doing hair metal, well, we still love you and we appreciate you trying to do heavy metals. But the hair metal, the reason why hair metal analysis even exists is because that's the only way we used to be able to test for metals. Nowadays we do urine metal testing. That's the only way to do metal testing, and it must be provoked. If you have a metal test that wasn't actively provoked with a chelating agent, it is literally useless unless it's high. If it's high, you know you have a problem. If you have an unprovoked high sample, you definitely have a problem. But the sample must always be provoked. So we talked about provoking GPL, or the environmental chemicals, and the mold toxins. With metals, you have to do a totally different provocation. That's with chelation. So I've got a heavy metal course, chelation course on the website. You can go and take the whole course. I'll walk you through what all we do and everything. But to put it simply, we do an infusion-based chelation provocation. There are pill versions. They're not as good as the infusion version, but if that's the only thing you have available, that's better than nothing. That's the only thing I used to do was oral until we started doing IV and found that it was way more powerful. But the way we do it is we do an IV infusion of chelating agents. And I always tell people, chelating agents are drugs. They are chemicals. They are man-made products. They are not natural at all. So these chelating agents, we do EDTA and DMPS, as well as Myers cocktail and glutathione. We give that infusion to patients and we collect their urine for 6 hours to see what comes out after we give them those products. And we always do a before sample and an after sample, and it's clear as day how much those chemicals and vitamins get out of your body, because you can see between the before and after. And I think I've got pictures posted on our social media as far as like what chelation looks like and how you can get these metals out of you. But metals are terrible for the body because they interfere with your own natural biochemistry. People often ask me, well, what is mercury causing for me? Well, the problem with metals is that metals interfere with your own natural things that you collect ions or metals for. So say you have a process that needs magnesium. Well, if you replace magnesium with mercury, now that process can't work. So what I encourage you to do is look through what does iron do, what does magnesium do, what does selenium, zinc, and molybdenum, all of those processes that are beneficial metals. If you insert a heavy metal instead, then you can just flip that to a negative and say, oh, zinc is good for the immune system. Well, mercury replacing zinc is bad for the immune system, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So metals are one of the most vague symptoms of, you can't just have, oh, I have a joint pain, so I have mercury. And it's not that straightforward. So there is no direct symptom that says, hey, I've had this, so I have this specific metal. It's very vague. The most predictive thing we can use to guess whether you have metal overload or not is just your exposure. That's the only thing we can go off of. If you've been shooting in a gun range all your life, if you've been a dental assistant drilling out mercury all your life, you probably have it. If you've been eating canned tuna all your life, you probably have mercury.
And then the one thing is that the FDA does not test for heavy metals. It's the one thing that they actually don't have to test for.
In food and products.
Yeah, sorry, in food and products. Yeah. So you could be having a protein powder that's commonly kind of exposed to lead or mercury or anything else in the soil. Because if you think about it, those heavy metals, they travel. They travel in rainwater, they travel downstream, they travel in soil, and you're getting it. Whatever food was grown in there, you're getting it. And there's different toxic areas of the United States. Yes, not everywhere is grown like Flint, Michigan. And we keep saying Flint, but we love you, you know. But the second you say that you were born in Houston, we go, okay, there you
you're
go.
Toxic.
The Valley, there you go. You know, so if you were in Portland, the pipes are all lead. The water's phenomenal, but everyone knows the pipes are all lead. So you're in Portland, you're most likely lead toxic. Just little things like that.
Don't trust the water.
No.
All right, we're going to wrap that up here. This was testing on how to test for toxins and metals. And stay tuned for our next video on how to, I think, supplements.
Yeah,
to
supplements
detoxify.
and food.
Or food to detoxify.
Food and supplements.
All right. See you
Bye,
guys. Bye.